Season 4 of Killing Floor 3 drops in 2 days. And look, I have been covering this franchise for months now, and I still cannot fully explain what it feels like to be 2 days away from potentially getting an answer to the question this whole series has been circling since video 1. Is the Patriarch coming back? Kevin Clamely, the founder of Horzine Biotech, the CEO who tried to clone his dead son and accidentally created the most dangerous bioweapon in human history. The man who transformed his own body into a massive armored monster rather than face accountability for what he had done. The villain who started everything. He has been conspicuously absent from Killing Floor 3. 70 years have passed since the events of Killing Floor 2. 70 years since the Patriarch was last seen escaping to Paris to upgrade himself. 70 years of the franchise refusing to officially confirm whether Kevin Clamely is still out there. And then his voice actor got confirmed to be involved with KF3. Yeah. The community lost it. This is the full story of the Patriarch, who Kevin Clamely actually was before everything went wrong. What drove him to transform himself, what the clone situation means, what happened across KF1 and KF2, and what 70 years in that form might have produced by the time Season 4 answers everything in 2 days. If you have never played any of the Killing Floor games, you're in exactly the right place. Everything gets explained as we go. Let's get into it. Quick context before we dive in. Killing Floor 3 is a co-op horror shooter set in 2091 in a world where a corporation called Horzine Biotech spent decades secretly producing bioengineered monsters called Zeds. A resistance group called Nightfall, led by Cordelia Clemedy, the granddaughter of the man who founded Horzine, exists specifically to fight back. The man who founded Horzine is Kevin Clamely, and Kevin Clamely has not been seen for 70 years. This is his story. Here's the thing about Kevin Clamely that most people miss when they first hear about him. He was not born a villain. He was the founder and CEO of Horzine Biotech, a British pharmaceutical company that, in the early 2000s, was secretly contracted by the British Ministry of Defense under a classified project called the Bedlam Initiative. The goal was the ultimate soldier. Something that would not feel pain, would not feel fear, would not question orders. A biological weapon in human form built from the ground up in a laboratory underneath London. Clemely was brilliant, genuinely talented, the kind of scientist who, in a different life with different choices, could have built something extraordinary and left the world better for it. But he had a dead son, and that is where the whole story turns. Somewhere in the process of running the most advanced cloning program in human history. Kevin Clamely stopped working on the government soldiers and started working on something the government absolutely had not paid for. He tried to bring his boy back. It did not work. What emerged from the experiment was not his child. It was the first clot, a creature built from a dead boy's genetic material, twisted by the process into something that had nothing left of the person it came from. And here's the part that defines the entire franchise from that moment forward. Clamely looked at what grief had produced. He understood it was not what he wanted. He decided it was still useful. He kept going. I think about that decision a lot when I think about this franchise. Because everything, every Zed, every outbreak, every video in this series traces back to one man in a basement looking at a failed experiment and deciding that was fine actually. And the most disturbing part is that what came next was not chaos or desperation. It was methodical, purposeful. The research expanded from that failure the way a company expands its successful product line. New creatures were developed in the underground facility beneath Horzine's West London office, the Gorefast, the Crawler, the Siren, whose sonic attacks were designed not just to damage but to make the environment itself feel wrong before she even got close. The Husk with flamethrower technology built directly into its body, the Scrake with a chainsaw arm integrated into its biology, and the Flesh Pound. The most powerful thing Horzine produced in this era, built around an adrenaline pump originally designed to keep Clemedy's failed clone alive that ended up amplifying its rage past any containment system's ability to manage. Along the way, Clemedy connected with Hans Volter, a former Nazi scientist from World War II who had been keeping himself alive through illegal biological experiments for decades, and who provided technology that pushed the research even further than it might have gone otherwise. Two men from completely different eras of history, both convinced biology had no limits worth respecting, building an army together underneath a city that had no idea what was happening below it. And then the government tried to shut it down. Horzine's methods were deemed too immoral, even for a controversial classified project. Scientists were leaving. Clamely feared someone would talk rather than accept that. He unleashed the Zeds. The outbreak began. London fell into chaos. Thousands died. And as the military finally closed in on Kevin Clamely himself, He made the last decision that was purely his own as a human being. He used the research on himself, transforming his body into the Patriarch, a massive armored hybrid of human and machine and bioengineering, equipped with a chain gun and rocket launcher, able to turn invisible to escape and heal himself with syringes strapped to his leg. The founder of Horzine became the most dangerous thing Horzine had ever produced, not by accident, by choice. Now, here's a detail that changes how you think about the Patriarch as a villain. He thinks of the Zeds as his children. The creatures built from his dead son's genetic material, twisted and multiplied and spread across Europe, are not just weapons to him, they are the family he built from grief when the original family he had did not survive intact. That reframes everything. The Patriarch is not just a mad scientist who lost control of his experiments. He is a father who replaced a family he lost with something he could control, something that would never leave him the way his son did. The army is grief made flesh. And when mercenaries started fighting through that army in Killing Floor 1, eventually locating a laboratory hidden beneath a London subway station with the help of his estranged daughter Rachel, his own living child who actively opposed him, the Patriarch escaped rather than face defeat. He escaped to Paris, left 2 clones of himself behind to fight in his place, went to find Hans Volter, upgraded, came back in Killing Floor 2, as something even more dangerous than what had fought through London. Now, this is where things get genuinely interesting and honestly a little unsettling. The Patriarch cloned himself multiple times. There were at least 2 Patriarch clones in the London laboratory. The mercenaries destroyed in KF1, which means encounters with the Patriarch throughout KF1 and KF2 may not always have involved the original Kevin Clamely. And one source within the lore goes further. It suggests the original Kevin Clamely was actually killed by one of his own clones at some point during KF2. That the actual person who founded Horzine and built the first clot from his dead son's DNA was eventually betrayed by a copy he had made of himself. If true, what does a Patriarch clone do with no original to follow? What does it do with decades of continued self-modification and an army of Zeds and the full breadth of Kevin Clamely's scientific knowledge, but none of the grief and personal history that drove the original's specific obsessions? That is a question with some genuinely disturbing possible answers, and it is the question that hangs over everything that happened in Killing Floor 2, 1 month after the London outbreak. The infection had spread across continental Europe. The Patriarch was back upgraded in Paris by his time with Hans Volter, more dangerous, an army that had grown from the original London specimens into something covering a continent. He is encountered multiple times across KF2's events, defeated in those encounters at least temporarily, but never confirmed dead. Defeated in specific fights, yes. Gone as an ongoing presence in the world. The franchise never said so. And then 70 years passed, the world rebuilt. Horzine survived and rebranded and grew. A new generation of research under Dr. Emmanuel Moorcroft, Horzine's current chief scientist, who believes a substance called the Mire represents the next step in human evolution, produced entirely new categories of Zed, the original research program never imagined, and Kevin Clamely, original or clone or some version that is harder to categorize than either, became the single biggest unanswered question in the franchise. Whatever version of the Patriarch exists in 2091 has had 70 years. 70 years of continuing to apply whatever research and technology became available to a form that was already barely recognizable as human when the process started. The version in KF1 was Kevin Clamely shortly after his self-transformation. The version in KF2 was already significantly more dangerous. Whatever exists now has had 7 decades, and there is something new in the world that did not exist when the Patriarch was last confirmed active: the Mire. The substance Moorcroft has been using to create entirely new categories of Zed, described as extra-dimensional in its most advanced applications. This week, an oil drilling operation in the North Sea accidentally struck Mire, and Moorcroft personally seized the rig with his followers. Something that has been upgrading itself for 70 years, gaining access to a substance that rewrites biology at a level the original research never reached, is not a coincidence of timing. That is a convergence the story has been building toward, and honestly, if that is what Season 4 is setting up, the version of the Patriarch that walks through that door is going to be something none of us are fully prepared for. And here's where the theory stops being community speculation and becomes something closer to confirmation. The Patriarch's voice actor Xanthetic has been confirmed to be involved with Killing Floor 3 through cast listings and credits the community tracked down. A voice actor attached to a game with no confirmed in-game appearance yet almost always means an appearance is planned, combined with Season 4 dropping in 2 days, and the oil rig striking Mire, and the community's strongest reading of where the story has been pointing across 4 seasons of content. The case for the Patriarch returning is the strongest it has ever been, and the person who would have to face him if he does is standing 70 miles from Horzine's headquarters right now. Cordelia Clamely, Kevin's granddaughter, the woman who sold $52 billion of Horzine stock and built Nightfall specifically to fight the company her grandfather founded. If the Patriarch returns in 2 days, Cordelia confronts her grandfather's legacy directly for the first time. 3 generations, 1 family, 1 company, 1 war that was always going to come back to this moment eventually. Season 4 drops in 2 days. I have spent months covering this franchise, and I genuinely think this is the moment it has been building toward since the very first video, every thread pointing at the same place, every piece of evidence landing in the same direction. I could be wrong, the franchise has surprised me before, but I do not think I'm wrong about this one. Subscribe so you do not miss the Season 4 coverage the moment it drops, because whatever Tripwire reveals, we are going to go deep on every piece of lore it unlocks, and drop a comment. Original Kevin Clamely surviving 70 years through continued self-modification. Or a clone that has been running loose since KF2 with no original to follow. Which one do you think it is? Because honestly, I have been going back and forth on this for weeks and I still cannot fully decide. Tell me what you think.